I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I've learned that the older you get, the quieter your introductions become. I'm in my early 40s, settled enough to know who I am, tired enough to stop explaining it. I work steadily, live modestly, and measure success less by what people see and more by what stays standing when no one is watching. Motherhood has been the one role I never rushed, never regretted, and never treated lightly. My daughter Lily is 9 years old. She says please without being reminded. She folds her napkin before leaving the table. She listens more than she speaks, and when she does speak, it's thoughtful in a way that surprises adults. I've always believed children learn dignity by watching it, not by being lectured about it. Lily has watched carefully. Our family has never been perfect, but for years it stayed manageable. My younger brother David has always liked attention. His wife, Karen, understands presentation better than substance, but she's polite enough to keep things smooth. And then there is my mother. She has rules that change depending on who is watching. She calls them standards. I used to call them preferences. Over time, I learned they were something else entirely. The New Year's gathering was announced the way these things always are. No excitement. No warmth. Just expectation. Dinner at my mother's house. Assigned seats. A table already decided before anyone arrived. I didn't think much of it. I never do. I've learned that anticipation gives problems their first breath. Lily asked what she should wear. I told her something comfortable. She smiled, trusting me completely. That trust has weight to it. It sits heavier than any holiday dish I've ever carried through my mother's front door. As we drove over that evening, the neighborhood lights blinked on one by one. Everything looked ordinary, predictable, safe. I remember thinking, with a kind of tired optimism, that this year might pass without incident. That maybe age had softened things. That maybe we'd simply eat, exchange polite conversation, and go home quietly. I thought it would be just another family dinner. My mother's house has always looked like it was waiting for guests. Everything arranged just so, cushions at right angles, silver polished even on ordinary days, family photos curated rather than displayed. It was a kind of perfection that never invited comfort. You entered with shoes off and guard up, even if you were family. Especially if you were family. That evening, the air inside carried the scent of cinnamon candles and roasted turkey. The table was stretched longer than usual, a sign she expected everyone. A crisp white cloth, gold-rimmed china, and those crystal glasses she only brought out when she wanted to remind us she still owned them. Every detail screamed presentation, not warmth. The seating arrangement was already laid out, name cards placed neatly beside folded napkins. I glanced at them out of habit. My brother David and his wife Karen were at my mother's right side, the spot she always reserved for her preferred. Their 2 daughters, identical in ribbons and confidence, sat nearby, whispering and giggling over something harmless. Lily stood close to me, her hands tucked neatly in front of her. Her dress was simple, pale blue with a tiny embroidered flower at the hem. She looked at the table with quiet awe, the way a child does when they still believe they're being included in something special. I felt her fingers brush mine, seeking reassurance. Karen smiled faintly when she saw us, though it was the kind of smile that only engaged half the face. David nodded, a courteous nod, practiced, impersonal. My mother stood at the far end, adjusting the centerpiece for the 3rd time, though it didn't need adjusting. Her eyes flicked over Lily and me like she was scanning a list, checking something invisible off. There was a pause when we entered, subtle but present. The kind that tells you've interrupted something rehearsed. My mother said, "You're right on time," in a tone that managed to make punctuality sound like intrusion. She gestured vaguely toward the seats, then turned away. Lily looked for her name card. There wasn't one. I told her softly, "It's all right, we'll find our spot." She nodded, trusting, her eyes scanning the table again. The other grandchildren had place cards written in gold ink. Hers was missing, or perhaps never made. I noticed Karen watching us from the corner of her eye. Not unkindly, but observantly, as though she already knew something I didn't. My mother poured herself a glass of water and stood unusually still. There was something deliberate in her stillness, something that made my stomach tighten before I understood why. I tried to ignore it, to focus on small things, the glint of the chandelier, the faint laughter from the kitchen, the way Lily smoothed her dress like she wanted to make a good impression. My mother took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the table, and then she stood up. It happened in seconds, too fast to stop, too slow to forget. "Lily," still unsure where to sit, moved toward the table edge where one chair sat empty. She glanced at me for silent approval, and I gave a small nod. That single nod is what I'll always remember, how something so ordinary can become the start of something irreversible. Before she could sit, my mother's hand came down, firm, final. "No," she said. The word wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to still every small sound in the room. Lily froze. My mother's hand stayed on the chair, claiming it as if she were protecting territory. "This seat," she said, her voice deceptively calm, "is for family." Her eyes cut toward David's daughters, who straightened slightly, proud in their perfect posture. Lily's eyes darted between us, trying to understand rules she'd never been told existed. Then my mother turned to Lily, and with a cold, practiced tone, said the line that would burn itself into the walls of my memory. "Only real granddaughters sit here." The words hung there, weightless, but heavy enough to crush everything inside me. Lily didn't cry. She just blinked, as if the sentence hadn't yet translated into emotion. Then she stepped back, quietly, her small hands curling into her dress. No one moved. Karen looked down. David cleared his throat but didn't speak. My father, somewhere behind his newspaper in the den, stayed silent, as always. My mother adjusted a napkin, as though she'd just made a correction to her perfect table. Inside me, something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I wanted to speak, to stand, to shout the truth about kindness and cruelty and what it means to be family. But my voice stayed buried under years of practiced composure. I simply reached for Lily's hand. It was small, warm, trembling. She looked up at me, her eyes asking questions I couldn't answer yet. Questions about belonging, about why adults say things that hurt and still call it love. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, counting the seconds between humiliation and restraint. I didn't say anything at the table. I didn't pull a chair, didn't raise my voice, didn't let my face change in a way that would give her satisfaction. I simply took Lily's hand and said, "Come with me for a moment, sweetheart." My voice sounded steady, even to me. That scared me more than if it had shaken. The hallway felt longer than usual. The laughter from the dining room followed us, muted but present, like proof that the world hadn't stopped just because something inside me had. I opened the small guest bathroom and closed the door gently, locking it with a soft click. The sound felt final. Lily stood near the sink, her feet barely touching the floor as she leaned back against the counter. She looked at herself in the mirror first, then at me. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad yet. It was confused, the kind of confusion children have when rules suddenly change without warning. "Mom," she asked quietly, "did I do something wrong?" That was the moment my chest tightened so sharply I had to look away. I turned on the tap, pretending to adjust the water, just to buy myself a second. In my head, 1,000 honest answers screamed to be let out. None of them were safe for a child. "No," I said finally, too quickly. Then slower, softer. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults have strange ways of talking. It's not about you." She nodded, trusting me completely, and that trust felt heavier than anger ever could. She accepted my explanation the way children do, not because it made sense, but because it came from me. She leaned into my side, her head resting against my arm, and I wrapped myself around her without thinking. That's when the first tear came. Just one. Silent. It slid down my cheek and dropped onto the shoulder of her dress. I wiped it away before she could see. Crying in front of her would have been easier, but I didn't allow it. Not yet. Standing there, holding my daughter in a locked bathroom while my family celebrated on the other side of the door, something became painfully clear. This hadn't been careless. This hadn't been a misunderstanding or a poorly chosen phrase. The seating. The missing name card. The pause. The words. They fit together too neatly. This was deliberate. I helped Lily straighten her dress and washed my hands, even though they weren't dirty. I looked at my reflection and memorized my face. Calm, composed, controlled. The face that would survive the rest of the evening. When we walked back out, I had already made a decision. Not to confront. Not tonight. Some things, I understood now, were better handled with silence first. It would have been easier if that moment at the table had come out of nowhere. If it had been a single sharp incident with no history behind it. But standing there later that night, helping Lily put her shoes back on, Memories lined up quietly in my mind, each one small on its own, all of them pointing in the same direction. I had always been the flexible one in my family. The daughter who adjusted schedules, smoothed conversations, made room for everyone else's comfort. If someone needed a holiday changed, I changed it. If someone needed a favor, I showed up. It was never demanded outright. It was expected, like gravity. Over the years, I learned how favoritism didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it came wrapped in compliments for others and silence for you. Sometimes it was the way photos were framed on walls, or how stories were told without mentioning certain people. Lily had felt it too, though she never named it. Fewer invitations to sit close. Fewer hands reaching for her. Always polite, always subtle. My mother cared deeply about appearances. About lineage. About what she considered proper continuation. Bloodlines mattered to her in a way that felt old-fashioned and immovable. I had brushed it off for years, telling myself it was harmless preference, generational thinking, nothing worth challenging. I told myself love showed up in different ways. But that sentence at the table hadn't been preference. It hadn't been tradition. It had been a line drawn clearly and publicly. It separated children into categories. It told my daughter exactly where she stood without saying her name. As I replayed it, I realized something important. This wasn't about one chair or one night. It was about permission. Permission my mother had just given herself to diminish my child openly. That was something I could not adjust around. Could not excuse. Could not absorb quietly the way I always had. When Lily fell asleep later, her face peaceful and unaware of the meaning behind what happened, I sat beside her longer than usual. I understood then that whatever flexibility I had once offered had reached its end. Not with anger. Not with drama. Something in me closed. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes thoughts louder. I moved through the kitchen slowly, making coffee the way I always did, as if nothing had shifted. When family members began to appear, I smiled. I asked how they slept. I passed plates. I stayed normal. No one expected anything else from me. My mother, on the other hand, seemed almost lighter. She spoke confidently, laughed easily, retold moments from the night before as if they had gone exactly as planned. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sign of regret. If anything, there was a sense of satisfaction, subtle but unmistakable. I noticed everything. Who avoided my eyes? Who pretended not to notice Lily sitting slightly apart? Who overcompensated with forced cheer? People revealed more in what they didn't say than what they did. I stored it all away carefully, without reaction. Lily followed me closely that day, her hand finding mine more often than usual. I squeezed back every time. I kept my tone light with her, asked about her favorite moments, made sure her world stayed intact. Protecting her didn't require confrontation. It required consistency. Inside, something had shifted gears. Not toward revenge. Toward control. I stopped wondering why my mother behaved the way she did. I stopped hoping someone else would step in. I stopped expecting apologies that were never coming. Instead, I began to think in longer lines. About timing. About consequences that didn't need announcements. About how silence, when chosen deliberately, could be louder than argument. I didn't make plans yet. I didn't name them. I only adjusted my posture in the story I had been playing for years. I stepped back just enough to see clearly. By the time we packed our bags and left, everything looked the same on the surface. Hugs were exchanged. Smiles were given. Goodbyes were polite. And then time moved forward, carrying everything with it. The following week, I went to the office not for the usual errands or paperwork, but to address matters quietly that no one else in the family had the patience, or perhaps the attention span, to notice. I reviewed files, correspondence, and procedural details that had been lingering for months, each one innocuous alone, but together forming a thread I could follow. It was deliberate, methodical work. I wasn't making noise. I didn't need anyone's approval. Thomas Reed, the senior administrator I had worked with for years, noticed the shift immediately. His respect was quiet but clear. He listened without interruption, nodded at my observations, and allowed me to outline the minor but significant corrections needed. I spoke calmly, detailing small errors in allocations, permissions, and scheduling that, if left unaddressed, would continue to favor other relatives disproportionately. The language I used was neutral, factual, almost boring to anyone untrained in administrative procedure, but each line carried weight. I could feel Lily beside me, drawing small sketches on a notepad, completely unaware of the depth of the actions we were layering in that room. My focus was not on impressing her or anyone else, it was on ensuring that she had quiet protection built into every corner of this space. Permissions, access, even minor approvals were checked and double-checked. My hands did not tremble, my tone did not falter. Outside, the world of my family continued as usual. Lunches were eaten, errands run, phone calls taken. No one knew that these documents, quietly adjusted, would limit control they had assumed was untouchable. Every motion was procedural, every note written in plain text, every email sent with carefully archived copies. There was no drama, no grand gestures. Just meticulous observation, timing, and the slow accumulation of leverage. I caught myself smiling once, soft, private, for no one else. Not at the humiliation they'd inflicted, but at the awareness that control could be exercised without spectacle. This was a chess move, not a checkmate. Each careful adjustment was one step ahead in a game that my mother, my brother, and even extended family could not see yet. By the time I returned home, the air in the house felt unchanged. Plates were cleared. Conversations meandered through trivialities. Lily giggled with her cousins, completely untouched. And yet, beneath that ordinary surface, a quiet power had begun to accumulate. They had no idea what was already in motion. Within a few days, subtle changes began to ripple through the household. My mother, normally unflappable and certain of her place at the head of every table, started noticing small discrepancies. Invitations she assumed were automatic went unanswered. Requests that once carried weight now required verification. I didn't announce any of it. I merely answered questions with a calm, measured tone, offering polite acknowledgement while withholding any indication of influence. Family members paused in conversations longer than usual, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. Instructions were repeated, only to be redirected according to protocols I had quietly adjusted. The patterns of authority were still intact on the surface, but underneath, momentum had begun to shift. Social assumptions, the invisible cues that defined who had status, were subtly recalibrated. Lily, meanwhile, began to experience small but noticeable differences. Elders deferred to her naturally, she was included without prompting, and her opinions, once politely overlooked, were heard. Her confidence, previously tentative, grew in tiny increments. It was never remarked upon aloud, yet the change was palpable. Watching her, I understood that protection and empowerment could be rendered quietly, with no fanfare, but with lasting effect. My mother observed these changes, her face calm but her eyes flickering with something unfamiliar. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the calculations running behind her composed exterior. Each glance, each pause, betrayed her awareness that something had shifted, though she could not name it. The power she had assumed was absolute no longer rested solely in her hands. Conversations that once centered on her decisions became less predictable. Requests were met with procedural responses instead of unquestioned compliance. My brother, still confident in his assumed authority, began to sense friction, but he attributed it to chance, timing, or minor oversights. And yet, in the quiet moments, I could see the hesitation forming, the tiny fissures in certainty that I had created without speaking a single word against them. I remained composed, observing, documenting in my mind the slow but irreversible progression of control. No one had to be humiliated. No one had to know the full extent. By evening, the household felt different. The weight of expectation, of assumed dominance, had shifted subtly toward me. The room itself seemed smaller, quieter, as if the air had thickened with unspoken acknowledgement. My mother noticed. She realized something was wrong. The morning after the subtle shifts in the household, I found myself alone with my mother in the quiet living room. Lily had been sent to play quietly upstairs, as I preferred these conversations without her presence, less distraction, less emotional pressure. My mother settled into her chair with the same controlled posture she always maintained, hands clasped, lips pressed thin. The surface calm was her armor, though I could sense the tension beneath it. I spoke first, deliberately neutral. I wanted to go over a few things regarding the arrangements for the family gatherings, I said softly, allowing a pause for comprehension. No dramatic gestures, no accusations. Just facts and boundaries. My mother's gaze flickered toward Lily upstairs, then returned to me. She shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, a sign I had learned to read over decades. I've adjusted who participates in certain activities, who sits where, and how invitations are confirmed, I continued. My tone never rose. Each sentence was matter-of-fact, grounded in procedure and timing, yet carried the weight of control. She nodded slightly but remained silent. There was no interruption, no attempt to counter. She seemed unsure how to respond to someone so composed, so calmly unassailable. I understand your concerns about tradition, I said, but I need you to acknowledge that Lily's presence and inclusion come first now. This isn't about me, it isn't about challenging your authority, it's about her well-being and how we structure family participation. I let the words linger in the quiet air, watching as her carefully cultivated composure began to falter imperceptibly. She opened her mouth to speak, then paused, the words failing to align with the reality I had established. I didn't argue, I didn't justify, I didn't raise my voice. I merely observed. Each sentence, each clarification, was delivered with precision and restraint, the emotional weight entirely on my side without appearing forced. The room remained silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. My mother's shoulders dropped slightly, the first sign of private acknowledgement. She had nothing to say, no comeback that wouldn't sound hollow against the quiet authority I had taken. Lily's influence, unspoken but deeply embedded, rendered any argument unnecessary. As I concluded the conversation, I stood slowly, placing a gentle hand on my daughter's shoulder when she wandered in quietly. She smiled up at me, unaware of the intricacies unfolding around her, yet perfectly positioned to thrive within them. My mother remained seated, speechless, the weight of understanding pressing silently against her composure. For the first time, she had no words. Weeks passed, and the consequences of my quiet, methodical actions became fully visible. The family gatherings continued, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Where my mother once dictated seating, decisions, and minor privileges with effortless authority, she now moved with careful hesitation, accounting for boundaries she had never before considered. Invitations that were once automatic now required acknowledgement of rules she had once ignored. Lily, oblivious to the machinations behind her comfort, thrived. She spoke confidently, joined discussions unprompted, and received acknowledgement from extended relatives who previously had deferred to my mother. Her joy was pure, untainted by the subtle power shifts that made me both strategist and protector. My mother, the arbiter of tradition and hierarchy, recognized the change in every glance, every hesitation from others in the room. It was quiet, intangible, and undeniable. Her authority, long assumed to be absolute, had been tempered by unseen, procedural adjustments that left her unable to reclaim the same effortless influence. The loss was social, emotional, and legacy-oriented, not loud, not humiliating, but complete. I observed all of it with calm detachment. No speeches were made, no confrontations required. Each smile of Lily, each nod of acknowledgement from extended relatives, reinforced the effectiveness of restraint, planning, and measured action. I did not gloat, did not claim victory. The win was quiet, professional, and permanent, exactly as intended. Sitting in my own space that evening, I reflected on the power of patience, subtlety, and focused intent. The house was quieter, lighter in some ways, yet heavier with unspoken awareness. The lessons of control and timing were embedded not in raised voices or dramatic gestures but in careful, silent action that could never be undone. And as I watched Lily play near the window, oblivious to the shift she had indirectly commanded, I realized that sometimes, the most enduring victories are those no one announces, except in the calm certainty of having acted wisely. The house was never quite the same, and neither was my mother's certainty, leaving a silence that lingered far longer than any spoken words could. Time passed, as it always does, and with it came a rhythm to the household that felt steadier, quieter, and ultimately stronger. I watched Lily grow each day, confident and curious, her small hands reaching for knowledge, her laughter ringing unguarded through spaces that once carried tension. There was no dramatic announcement of change, no speeches about lessons learned, no declaration of triumph. The victories had been earned quietly, deliberately, through patience and attention to detail, the kind of victories that leave no scars except for the invisible shift in authority. I reflected often on what had unfolded, not with resentment but with clarity. Family respect, I realized, is never granted. It is observed, tested, and measured over time. Actions speak louder than words, especially when they are restrained, precise, and deliberate. I had chosen to protect my daughter's place, not by confrontation or shouting, but by shaping the environment reinforcing boundaries, and ensuring that her dignity was never compromised again. In doing so, I had also reclaimed my own. The house, once a theater of subtle favoritism and inherited authority, now responded differently to presence, tone, and posture. My mother moved through the rooms carefully, her assumptions tempered by the knowledge that some decisions were no longer hers alone. She had to observe, consider, and respect limits she had previously ignored. She had learned the quiet lesson that authority, unchecked and unquestioned, is vulnerable when met with deliberate, patient opposition. And though she never admitted it aloud, the effect was clear in the subtle hesitations, the measured words, the absence of habitual dominance that had once gone unquestioned. Lily, meanwhile, remained unaware of the strategies unfolding around her. She thrived because her environment had been silently curated to protect her, to allow her confidence to blossom naturally. Each moment she explored, each question she asked, was a small triumph of dignity preserved, a proof that subtle action often carries more weight than loud declarations. The household learned, without confrontation, that care, preparation, and deliberate restraint can guide outcomes more effectively than anger, argument, or dramatic protest. And I, watching her, felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that long-term protection and respect do not need applause. They need observation, patience, and the courage to act without fanfare. In her eyes, I saw strength forming, independent, calm, and undeniable. That reflection was mine to keep, and it lingered far longer than any heated argument ever could. Sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones left unspoken. Sometimes the strongest victories are the ones that never need telling. I let the quietness settle, letting it speak for itself. Lily's confidence was full, unwavering, and visible in every small gesture, every assured step. And in that silence, I found the enduring truth: dignity, patience, and quiet resolve outlast any fury, any spectacle. I leaned back in my chair, the soft light casting gentle patterns across the room, and watched her play. No one had to notice what had been done. No one had to understand. The house had shifted. Authority had shifted. And yet it felt natural, inevitable, and permanent. I realized, as I observed her, that true strength is often invisible, measured in small victories and protected spaces. It lingers quietly, as enduring and unforgettable as the love and dignity we choose to preserve. Lily's laughter carried through the quiet room, confident, self-assured, and entirely hers. And in that sound, I felt the calm, unspoken truth settle fully. Some victories are won not by being heard, but by being quietly, profoundly effective.